Good evening. My name is Maggie Koval, and I'm Executive Director of Colorado Humanities. Welcome to Change in Rural Colorado, Loving Our Land. Colorado Humanities and Colorado State University's Regional Economic Development Institute have joined forces to develop the Change in Rural Colorado discussion series. I'd like to thank Dr. Dawn Thilmany and Dr. Stephen Weiler for working with us on this project, and the Colorado Humanities Board and staff members, Gina Hewitt, Josephine Jones, Chris Goff, and Nora Ridgway. Thanks also to the National Endowment for the Humanities for financial support. Where I grew up, my family's property bordered a state park. As kids, my brother and I and our friends considered the park an extension of our backyards, and we roamed freely among the trees and the picnic tables. My parents and our neighbor bought their land from an elderly farmer, adding his small farm to a small rural residential neighborhood. The homeowners, the park superintendent, and the farmer had different relationships with that land, but they all valued the larger landscape and the wildlife around them. The land, water, and air in rural Colorado is often one of the main reasons people choose to live beyond our cities. Freedom to explore and enjoy the land, the waterways, and wildlife is central to our identity as Western Americans. Rural Colorado offers ways to engage visitors that benefit rural communities through recreation, and agriculture and resource extraction drive the economies of many rural areas. I am looking forward to learning from our panelists tonight and hearing from all of you as we examine and discuss how we balance stewardship, access to, and beneficial use of our lands. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Dawn Thilmany. Dr. Thilmany is Professor of Agricultural Economics, co-director of the Regional Economic Development Institute, and Director of Engaged Research at Colorado State University. Please welcome Dr. Thilmany.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and what a great way to start the evening's discussion. We at Colorado State University are thrilled to have this be one of our main partnerships with the Colorado Humanities Council to co-host these discussions about the changing face of rural Colorado. So thank you for that. Just to give you a little context about what we at Colorado State do in this space. As she mentioned, I'm a co-director of the Regional Economic Development Institute with Dr. Stephen Weiler, who's also on the call tonight. And that is an engaged research enterprise we started about 5 years ago, specifically to look at some of the economic development opportunities and unique aspects of Colorado. And we chose, when we established that institute, to have a particular focus on the rural-urban divide and bridges that can help alleviate that divide. And so this program is a perfect place for us to do so. We're made up of about 15 faculty associates and an advisory board from both here in the US and internationally. So we're excited to continue to learn what we can do to further the conversations in Colorado. More broadly than the Regional Economic Development Institute, the Vice President of Engagement and Extension at Colorado State University has a mission, particularly through our extension programming, to reach into every county of the state and provide impactful programming, including in natural resources. And beyond extension and here on campus, we have a number of our research centers, some of which you'll hear from tonight, that have a very strong engagement mission. And our new president, Joyce McConnell, just reinforced how important engaged scholarship is going to be. So these discussions are not only great for us to share what we know, but also to hear questions from you all in discussions that help us frame what our new research programs will be going forward. And so we're very excited to feature our natural resource management partners, both from on campus and some of the partners they work with in the field tonight. That said, let's go ahead and transition and introduce our speakers for the night, because they're probably who you're really here to hear from. So let's go ahead and do so. So I'm going to be introducing them in the order you'll hear from them tonight. And let's start with Heather Knight, who is the Associate Director at the Center for Collaborative Conservation here at CSU. She joined the Center for Collaborative Conservation as the Associate Director of the Practitioner Program. And prior to that role with CCC as a staff member, she served an active role on the executive committee and a co-instructor in their conservation leadership through learning graduate program. Heather brings extensive experience in conservation with 22 years working with the Nature Conservancy. I got to meet her as one of my very first partners here at CSU. And I can tell you, her and her husband, Rick, have a true passion for rural Colorado, engaged scholarship, and they are an exciting part of our team. Next, we'll hear from Mike Lester, who is the State Forester and Director of the Colorado State Forest Service, which a lot of people actually don't realize is actually part of our CSU system. He may explain more of that. He's the State Forester and Director of the State Forest Service, with his work focusing on the protection of Colorado's forest resources, ensuring forestry education, outreach, and technical assistance to private landowners. Lester previously served as the Assistant State Forester for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry, and he holds an MBA from the State University of New York and a Master of Forestry from Duke University. He's the past president of the Society of American Foresters, so we're thrilled to have him here, particularly because he has that rich context and even more than our state. Next, you'll be hearing from Sonja Chavez, the General Manager of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. Sorry, I got tripped up on that. She joined the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District as General Manager in December 2019. She received her BA in Environmental Biology and MA in Limnology, which is the study of freshwater systems, from the University of Colorado. Her areas of expertise are in water quality, water resources management, funding acquisition, and environmental and natural resource sciences, policy, and planning. Finally, we'll be hearing from another project partner from the field, Wade Shelton, who is the Senior Project Manager with the Trust for Public Lands. Wade has over 20 years of experience working in land conservation and environmental restoration, and he currently works as a Senior Project Manager and the Conservation Fellow with the Trust for Public Lands, Colorado and Southwest Office. Mr. Shelton has led a diverse range of land conservation projects across a variety of landscapes, including Fisher's Peak State Park, which we might hear more about tonight, agriculture and water conservation in Colorado's Upper Arkansas Valley, local park and open space projects with the City of Denver, the City of Loveland, Adams County Open Space, and the U.S. National Park Service. Wade holds a BA in Environmental Biology from Colgate University, a Master's in Environmental Management from Duke, and studied wildlife management in Kenya. He has published in the Carolina Planning Journal and has received numerous awards, including from Colorado Lottery, the National Association of Counties, Live Well Westwood, the Land Trust for Open Arkansas, and the Lake County Open Space Initiative. I think you can clearly tell from those bios that we have a really rich discussion ahead of us tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers, and let's hear first from Heather.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Maggie. Great thanks tonight to Colorado Humanities and Colorado State University for this opportunity to join this wonderful panel and also join all of you in a conversation this evening. Next slide, please. The Center for Collaborative Conservation was established in 2008 within Colorado State University's Warner College of Natural Resources. At the CCC, we believe that lasting conservation happens when members of communities bring together diverse voices and interests, working from the ground up to forge a common vision of what's possible, of what's needed, and then to co-create solutions that result in well-stewarded natural resources that support the community's economies and culture. We call this community-based collaborative conservation, or sometimes place-based collaborative conservation, or simply collaborative conservation. The CCC takes action on this by building the capacity of organizations and communities and our next leaders to do this work. And we use applied research and local knowledge to help communities impact conservation. We have 3 program areas at the CCC: training, networking, and conservation. Training, it's all about disseminating and developing the how to do this collaborative approach. Training programs, formal teaching, peer-to-peer learning, applied research, and our fellows. For networking, we focus on bringing practitioners, the leaders of these communities and their member partners together to connect to each other and to resources that allow them to be better people. We do that through gatherings such as the Confluence event, tools like the Atlas for Collaborative Conservation in Colorado, regional maps and searchable directories that connect communities and practitioners to resources. And then finally, conservation. So this is all about providing education and products and services to facilitate these on-the-ground conservation efforts. So we work with groups, short-term and long-term, to navigate these collaborative processes. Next slide, please. The Center for Collaborative Conservation is host and facilitator to the Western Collaborative Conservation Network. This network has been developed over the last 2.5 years by 35 different conservation groups across the West, built by collaborative groups for collaborative groups. The network, the WCCN, promotes these collaborative groups to sustain and strengthen healthy landscapes, vibrant communities, and thriving economies. We started with the core of 7 Intermountain Western states and recently added Oregon, Nevada, and Texas. These groups work across forested lands, watersheds, rangelands, private lands, tribal lands, public lands. And you can imagine these collaborative groups come in all shapes and sizes, representing the communities and the landscapes that they care about. And their membership is diverse as well, whether it be local, state, or federal agencies, academic partners like ours, conservation funders and policymakers, business and industry, community members, private landowners, ranchers, farmers, tribes, and lastly, conservation nonprofits. We see collaboration as a solution. Building the ability of these groups to collaborate increases their ability to be successful in their communities for better stewarded natural resources and for their economies and livelihoods. Collaborative conservation is the fastest growing part of conservation. Across Colorado alone, the Atlas I mentioned includes over 200 of these community groups. Let me just illustrate 3 of them for you, and you'll hear about other projects from our other panelists. Next slide, please. So let's go to our southwestern part of our state, the Gunnison Basin Wet Meadow Restoration and Resiliency Building Collaborative. This is a public-private partnership. Members of this basin have recognized over time that climate change and weather patterns have had large effects in their landscape, whether it be the intensity and scale of wildfires, drought, changes in invasive species. Many of you have experienced these yourselves in your own landscapes. They recognize that these have contributed to changes that affect both people and wildlife in the Gunnison. They've built this collaborative to implement activities, restoration projects on the ground to try to affect groundwater, the length and retention and storage of water in their landscape, in their wetlands, rivers, and streams. They work with 22 different partners, including consultants, conservation NGOs, local, state, and federal agencies, academic partners, and funders. Next slide. In the San Luis Valley area of our state, you'll find the Rio Grande Headwaters Partnership, project. They work on restoring and conserving the historic function and what they call the vitality of the Rio Grande Basin. Their activities include projects for water quality improvement, more efficient agricultural water use, riparian health, wildlife and aquatic species habitat restoration, recreational opportunities, and community safety. So you'll see projects of theirs like these in this slide, people out on the ground doing reclamation after fire, restoring the banks of streams to stabilize them, provide better water for agriculture and for recreation, improvements to infrastructure for agriculture, and also a lot of outreach and education in their community, bringing people out on the ground together to improve their place. Next slide, please. My last example is the Yampa River Fund. Here we are on the Yampa River in the fall. You know, this memorable river and this great community. This community has created this voluntary fund to support community needs, identifying projects that improve water supply, wildlife habitat, and recreational opportunities, as well as ranching in their watershed. Projects are directed towards improved flows and river health, recreational flows for outfitters and general tourism, and for ranching. They have over 20 partners in their collaborative as well, including the City of Steamboat Springs, the Yampa Valley Community Foundation, Routt and Moffat counties, and local NGOs and many community members. Last slide, please. The Western Collaborative Conservation Network and the Center for Collaborative Conservation support these projects and many others that you'll find across the state. We believe that collaborating together from communities, working together from the ground up, engaging all kinds of voices and interests, lead to healthy landscapes, sustained economies, and thriving cultures. Collaboration from the ground up is what we're focused on, and helping these organizations and their partners to find solutions that benefit people and steward the places that nourish them and that they love. Thank you.
My name is Mike Lester. I'm the director of the Colorado State Forest Service. Sorry for that little lag there. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Colorado State Forest Service and the work we do with forests and communities throughout Colorado. And of course, we're very excited about the theme of tonight's talk, because we do believe that we need to invest in our land. So, Chris, you give me the first slide? Perfect. Thank you. So we manage forests statewide. Colorado's diverse forest environments provide clean air, at least when they're not burning, clean water, enhance wildlife habitat, reduce wildfire risk, supply essential forest products, and on their best days, they sequester quite a bit of carbon as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our mission is to achieve the stewardship of Colorado's diverse forest environments for the benefit of present and future generations. That's the thing about forests, is we're looking forward about 200 to 300 years. And our vision is healthy and resilient forests for Colorado. And you'll find as I go through this talk that we're a little bit lacking in reaching the vision, but we're giving it our best shot right now. Now, the Colorado State Forest Service, we're kind of unique in some respects. we work for both Warner College. We're a center of Warner College at Colorado State University, but we also provide the staffing for the Division of Forestry for the Department of Natural Resources. We are the lead state agency of providing protection for the forest environment. And our state office is in Fort Collins, and we have 19 offices throughout the state. Chris, can you show the next slide, please? There you go. So that gives you some sense of how widespread we are with the state of Colorado. Quite a few offices on the Front Range, but pretty well covering the whole state. Next slide, please. If you talk about forest health in Colorado, one of the things that come to mind almost immediately is the issue we've had with bark beetles. As you can see there, the orange lines are mountain pine beetle, the blue are spruce beetle. Over the last, probably 20 years, we've had significant mortality on more than 5 million of our 24 million acres of forest. That's fairly serious. As you can see now, mountain pine beetle is kind of a bit in remission, but the spruce beetle is going strong. That's still something we have to deal with and causes a lot of forest health issues. So we've had tree mortality on roughly 20% of our Colorado forests in the past 2 decades. And that's not insignificant. So these unhealthy forest conditions, we have a naturally dense, overcrowded forest that make them prone to insect infestations and can fuel large, destructive, uncharacteristic wildfires. And then those, of course, have their own problems that come with it. And I think some of them that Heather talked about a little bit as well. So the vision we see on TV is these huge fires erupting, and that is catastrophic. But after they're over, we're not done yet. We have post-fire erosion, runoff impacts that impact drinking water, infrastructure, municipal costs, and a host of others. And much of Colorado's wild and urban interface, and that's the place where our forests, where we live, are located in these overly dense forests. Dead beetle-killed trees don't necessarily burn more often, but when they do burn, they cause a lot of difficulties in trying to predict fire behavior and in tactics in trying to deal with that. So our forest management efforts really try to address those insect concerns in that overly dense forest so we can increase public safety, improve forest health, and protect water supplies. And we also are taking advantage of past forest management treatments, and we can see that they can pay off in suppression efforts and reduce these negative post-fire impacts. And we'll talk about some specific examples in a couple of minutes. Next slide. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about 2 really quickly. The first one is the Buffalo Mountain Fire at Silverthorne. That happened in 2018, and is a result of the mitigation work that the Colorado State Forest Service did, and the U.S. Forest Service, and Summit County over a period of 5 years at the tune of about $1 million. So that's pretty expensive. But the work that we did when that fire hit allowed us to drop retardant on that fire and get that fire under control. Now, at that point in time, we had evacuated roughly 1,400 homes, valued at about, I think it was $913 million. This fire was about a mile from Dillon Reservoir. It was less than a mile from Interstate 70. So the impacts are conservatively rated could have been more than $1 billion. So $2 million worth of work, and then we have savings of over $1 billion. So that's one example. The second one I want to give you is the Cameron Peak fire that happened this summer. It is the largest fire that we've had in Colorado's history. The Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest, headquartered in Fort Collins, had worked on a series of treatments to try to keep those fires from moving from west to east, which is how they typically move. And if you could see the animation that they've produced in the computer graphics, which I don't have, but I'm sure they'd be more than happy to share with you, it shows how as that fire grew and moved, when it hit those treatments, where they'd done prescribed fire, where they'd done mechanical treatments, it took the energy out of that fire and allowed the firefighters to get somewhat sense of control over it. Monty Williams, who's the regional forester there, he and I have talked about if it had only happened a little bit, a couple of years from now, it might have stopped the whole fire dead in its tracks. But it's an excellent example of how this work can make our community safer. Chris, next slide. Thank you. And of course, we do a lot of work with our with watersheds. We have a long-standing relationship with water utilities to reduce wildfire risk and potential watershed impacts. We've been working with Denver Water for over 30 years. A couple of years ago, along with the U.S. Forest Service, we signed a memorandum of understanding with Colorado Springs Utilities, work with Northern Waters, Aurora Water, just as some examples of the folks that we do work with on the water side. Chris, next slide, please. Thank you. And that's because Colorado is the nation's water tower. This is a really striking graphic because you look at it, well over 35% of the landmass of the U.S. gets water from Colorado's high country, which means protecting this water, not just a benefit to Colorado, but a benefit to a large part of the nation and even down into Mexico. And so talk a little bit more about this and other ways how we can be effective. We recently just finished our forest action plan. That's required by the U.S. Farm Bill. And every 10 years, state forestry agencies need to complete a forest action plan, assessing the health of that state's forest and plans to try to maintain that health. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. We just finished that this December. It's got a pretty wide distribution, and it is a plan on how we're going to protect Colorado's forests. It's using science and geographic information system data to focus on areas of greatest impact and need. Chris, could you give me the next one? Thank you. This is an example of our combined map. Now, this looks at forest health, wildfire probability, and watershed condition. So those areas that are redder are where we have a higher priority for action. We are a relatively small agency. There's only 110 of us. The U.S. Forest Service has quite a few more people, but still not enough. So we've all agreed that we need to spend what we have wisely and use our resources wisely. And planning tools like this allow us to do that. They allow us to see where we have the greatest need and focus those resources there. It also gives us a chance to incorporate the latest science from CSU's Warner College and the U.S. Forest Service's Rocky Mountain Research Station. So they are all part of making this happen. And it also helps us work with key partners. And so I want to talk a little bit about the synergy with CSU. We are part of Colorado State University, and we're one of 5 states in the country that are headquartered in the land-grant university. And it really increases our effectiveness because we have this cutting-edge science at our fingertips. We've worked with Warner College to develop a graduate silviculture certificate so our staff can keep training and keep learning. We have a staff role in teaching. We have an internship program where anywhere from 3 to 7 students each year get out in the field and work with our staff. We have a partnership with Extension. We share facilities with Extension in 2 locations, and we employ a lot more students as hourly employees. And we mentioned that we're a relatively small agency, so we get things done with partnerships. I will talk real briefly about these because I know I'm getting short on time, but one of them is shared stewardship. That's an agreement that Governor Polis signed with the U.S. Forest Service in October of 2019. And what it means is that we're going to work together using that forest action plan to try to identify the places that we're going to try to protect and then working together to protect those. Vicki Christensen, who's the chief of the U.S. Forest Service, has a term she likes. It's random acts of conservation. And her point is that if we do a project here and 30 miles over, we do another project, and 50 miles there, we do another project, that's great. However, those random acts of conservation won't really protect a community or water supply. For that, we need to work together and link those treatments. And that's some of the work we do with our water providers that we mentioned earlier. We also work with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control in the Department of Public Safety. We work very closely with the Department of Natural Resources, and particularly the State Land Board and Parks and Wildlife. We work with the U.S. Forest Service. I mentioned shared stewardship. Also, we have something called the Good Neighbor Authority, which allows us to go on U.S. Forest Service land and help them manage their lands as well. And another program we have is called Forest to Faucets, where the U.S. Forest Service, the Colorado State Forest Service, and the water utilities all work together to try to make sure we are trying to protect our really precious water resources. We've got another project with the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the American Forest Foundation, where we are getting plans done in Southwest Colorado and in the upper Arkansas headwaters. And finally, I'm going to talk real briefly about the Upper South Platte Partnership. And I'm going to reel off a list of partners that are working together to protect the Strontia Springs Reservoir in Jefferson County, where most of the water to Greater Denver flows through the Strontia Springs Reservoir. And so get ready. I got to take a deep breath before I give you all these partners because it's quite the list. Denver Water, the U.S. Forest Service, American Forest Foundation, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Jefferson Conservation District, Coalition for the Upper South Platte, and the Nature Conservancy, and of course, the Colorado State Forest Service. So we all working together to try to work on private land, public lands, so we can protect Strontia Springs Reservoir. And that's an example of not random acts of conservation, but concentrated acts of conservation. We got a lot of challenges going forward. We have 24 million acres of forest in Colorado, and about 12.6 million of those acres, or roughly 50%, are classified as moderate or higher risk for wildfire. And almost 1.2 million of those acres are in the wildland-urban interface where we all live. Matter of fact, that's where half of Colorado's population lives. Now, we're not trying to eliminate fire. Fire is part of Colorado. Most of our ecosystems are fire-driven, but what we are trying to do is mitigate and minimize these uncharacteristic wildfires that cause so much destruction going forward. Forest management is not an inexpensive proposition. Wildfire mitigation treatments are generally in the front range, exceed $2,500 an acre. That's pretty expensive. Now, in the West, where we have one large sawmill, they're quite a bit cheaper there, but having a forest product really does make the cost of treatment quite a bit less expensive. And if you look at those forests, 30% of those are privately owned in Colorado. So you think it's all the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and that is about 65% of our forests. But 30% is privately owned. So that's a fairly significant part as well. The other challenge is 85% of Colorado's population is within 5 miles either side of I-25. They're not really connected to the forest, even though it impacts them deeply. So how do you keep them engaged and make sure they understand how important Colorado's forests are? And the final piece of that is healthy forests are really essential for Colorado's communities. And that's your street trees, which really prevent water runoff. They keep us from spending a lot of money on air conditioning and really make our cities more livable. And that's part of it as well. So I just want to wrap up real quickly. I talked about this a lot, and I can talk about this almost forever, but Colorado's forests provide Colorado with many, many important benefits. But if we're going to continue to receive those benefits, we're going to have to invest in our forests. And I really look forward to hearing our other speakers kind of delve into these issues as well. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure having this opportunity.
Good evening. My name is Sonja Chavez. I'm the General Manager of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. I've been asked to talk to you today about the role of water in a rural, isolated community in Colorado and the changes that we are seeing in our community. Next slide, please. So I am a Colorado native. I grew up in Southern Colorado. I am 5th generation ranching. My passion lies in water and the protection of the communities which depend upon that water resource. I moved to the Upper Gunnison River Basin and Gunnison in 2002. I used to race in this area as part of our track teams and come here for basketball games and stuff like that. So knew the community well back then and fell in love with it. And so when presented with the opportunity to live here, moved quickly with my family. The mission of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District, or the Upper Gunnison District, is to be an active leader in all issues affecting the water resources of the Upper Gunnison Basin. That includes operating reservoirs as supplemental water sources or augmentation water sources for our growing communities up here in the Gunnison and Crested Butte communities. It includes the working with a stakeholder work group for operation of Taylor Park Reservoir and Dam, which is a picture on the upper right-hand corner. We have a thriving agricultural community with grass pasture production closely tied to cattle, amazing fishery, beautiful green meadows, wildflower festivals, wildlife habitat, vibrant hunting out here, rafting, skiing, mountain biking. We are entirely dependent upon water and all the amenities and benefits that it provides to our community and economy. Next slide, please. Just to orientate you a little bit more where we are, Gunnison is the city where I live in, is located about 23 miles from Crested Butte Mountain Resort. The Gunnison Basin is comprised of 8 sub-watersheds, which is represented in the map on your left. Every one of these sub-basins is unique and different. Of importance is that we are at the headwaters of the Colorado River Basin. The Gunnison community is surrounded, 93% of the land surrounding the Gunnison community is in federal ownership. We have one storage reservoir, which is Taylor upstream, that is available to us. The Taylor River and the East River combine to form the Gunnison River. Therefore, Taylor Reservoir provides supplemental water for the Gunnison River for recreational and agricultural purposes. The map on the right just shows, I wanted to show you the political boundaries. The Upper Gunnison District is comprised of Gunnison County, all of Gunnison County, and then portions of Hinsdale County in the bottom left-hand corner, and then portions of Saguache County on the bottom right. Next slide, please. The Upper Gunnison community and our rural community is facing challenges, most notably related to population growth and pressures, as well as climate change. And you'll hear that theme throughout my presentation. The map on the right is a map of Colorado. The area in pink is the Gunnison Basin. The white line going down the middle of the map represents the Continental Divide. Our population within our state is projected to grow from about 8.6 million to about 10.5 million by 2050. The eastern slope is going to grow from about 4.5 million to 8.5 million, and the western slope from about 0.5 million to 1.5 million. An interesting fact and statistic here is that 80% of the water within the state of Colorado is on the western slope, and over 80% of the population is on the eastern slope. This creates some very interesting dynamics and dialogue within our state about water uses. The Gunnison Basin is one of the only basins left in Colorado which does not have a transbasin diversion to the Front Range or out of our basin. So there are many interesting conversations that we have. We have fought trans-mountain diversions for a number of years. Some of you may know or remember reading about the Union Park proposal to develop a reservoir up in the Taylor Basin. Next slide, please. But not only do we have challenges within our state, we also have challenges within the Colorado River Basin as a whole. So the upper basin, this map on the right, excuse me, is a map of the Colorado River Basin. The area shaded in green is that area. In the middle of that map is a black line that represents the division between the upper basin states and the lower basin states. The upper basin states include Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, and parts of New Mexico. The lower basin is represented by Nevada, California, and Arizona. The upper basin has a requirement under the Colorado River Compact to send 7.5 million acre feet on a rolling 10-year average down to the lower basin states. On the left-hand side is a photo of Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell in Page, Arizona. Lake Powell serves as a storage bucket for the upper basin states, captures, holds, and then releases water into Lake Mead and to the lower basin states for their use. From the photo on the left, you can see that white ring surrounding, or we call it the bathtub ring, that you could see in the rock structures and canyon walls of Lake Powell. That shows you how much Lake Powell levels have declined over the past 15 years or so. Why are those levels declining? It's related to two things. the operation of the reservoirs and the overuse of water by the lower basin states to the tune of about 1.5 million acre feet per year over the past 10 years. And then climate change. We're just not getting the precipitation and the snowpack and the flows that we were getting 20 or 25 years ago. And one interesting thing about the Colorado River Compact is that when they negotiated the amount of water that we had available to both to all of the states within the Colorado River Basin, they overestimated that amount by quite a bit. So that's just meant that in addition to that overestimation, we also have a basin that's highly overallocated, which means that we have more demand than we do actual supply. Next slide, please. We have a lot of interesting dialogue. We're going to be renegotiating the interim guidelines that they call them the 2007 interim guidelines that kind of describe how we manage the available water supply in the Colorado River Basin. And it's a negotiation that occurs between the upper basin states and the lower basin states. We also entered into what's called a drought contingency plan in 2019. The upper basin states under that plan agreed to the reoperation of the Colorado River Storage Project reservoirs, which include Blue Mesa Reservoir up near Gunnison and the Aspinall Unit, as well as Flaming Gorge and Navajo reservoirs. We also agreed to look at what's called demand management, which is an action or a way in order to reduce our water use in the upper basin state in order to prevent Lake Powell levels from declining below that level at which we can physically move water out of Lake Powell and into Lake Mead through the outlet works. That level, which is 3490, is critical because at that level, we can no longer produce hydropower out of Lake Powell, which impacts public health, safety, and welfare. It also impacts our ability as upper basin states to send our required amount of water to the lower basin states. So it's just, the levels are declining quickly. We're quickly approaching a level at which different measures will be implemented under the drought contingency plan. And that level is 3,525 feet in elevation above mean sea level in the reservoir. The dialogue revolves a lot between upper basin states and lower basin states, revolves around equity, fairness, overuse, what each state is going to do. We're going to have to come to agreement as part of upper basin states with Wyoming and Utah and others on what we're going to do in order to help prevent a crisis, which is quickly coming with the droughts that we've been seeing and the sustained drought that we've been seeing over the years. One of those questions is whether it's really fair to ask our agricultural producers to curtail their water use or to stop using their water use, which has impacts on our soil health, both long-term, it has impacts on our local economy. When you have areas in Arizona which are growing cotton, which is a highly loving plant, water-loving plant that requires about 48 inches of water to grow a crop, as to where, and then Arizona has, year-round production. The Upper Gunnison Basin has a 2-month time frame for our crops to grow, and we probably only use about 28 inches of water. So should we be going cotton in the desert and be asking upper basin states to curtail their water use? So interesting discussions. Next slide. Again, we have diminishing water supplies associated with climate change. Our projections coming out of the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center as of March 1st were that we would have only 47 to 72% of normal stream flow amounts in our rivers. That decreases our recreational economy. It shortens the time frame at which we can have boats on the river. We have greater intensity of fishing and pressure on our angling, which impacts the fishery as well. We also had a lot of people coming to our basin related to this COVID pandemic that we've been having. We have had illegal camping and campsites in our forests. We're worried about fires. We had a lot more trash and waste within our forested systems, which impacts water quality and our water supply. So there is a constant need as an Upper Gunnison Conservancy to try to balance, you know, the needs and the tourism that we have and our economy with the pressures that it has on our natural resources. Next slide, please. Again, with the climate change, it's not just drought, but it's these dramatic swings between highs and lows. 2007 and 2019 were years in which we had, the photo on the left is Blue Mesa Reservoir. We had a full reservoir, a lot of water. We had actually emergency releases out of the Aspinall unit, so it wouldn't get too high, and flushing flows that we did for the benefit of downstream endangered river fish. But in years like 2002, 2012, 2018, and now probably 2021, this is a photo of Blue Mesa Reservoir when our water supply is really low. And you could see that there's just a creek going into the reservoir. And you can see that full in this picture is much, much further back. It's, you know, we just don't have the water supply. This year, Blue Mesa is currently predicted to fill to only about 67%. Next slide, please. Another challenge that we have as a local community is just the impacts that we're seeing from disease on our forested systems. And I won't go into any additional detail, as Mike did a really great job, but as a Water Conservancy district, we're looking at what we can do, what partnerships and collaboration we can form with our federal entities that are helping to manage our forests and state entities, so that we look at things that are from our perspective of our values in terms of watershed health. It could be erosional issues, protection of our infrastructure. It could be wildlife habitat, preservation of Gunnison sage-grouse mesic habitat, wild cutthroat trout populations. You know, the health of our ecosystem and our environment is highly tied to our forest health. And so we're going to be doing some more detailed mapping in the Gunnison Basin and drilling down to a much tighter scale to kind of figure out what we can do and how we can partner with our forest management. Next slide, please. Finally, I won't go into much further detail, as we had a great presentation on that earlier as well about our Wet Meadows Restoration Building Program. This is a program that was formerly led by the Nature Conservancy, and which was taken over by the Upper Gunnison District in, I think, 2013 or 2014. And it's a program that we've been supporting for the past 7 or 8 years. We fund a coordinator for that program. And we know that, you know, if we're going to have an impact on Wet Meadows restoration, you know, we've been kind of doing it with just volunteer crews over the past 7 years. And we want to build that program to have a strong partnership with others to kind of get multiple crews that can go much longer, and, you know, have 2 or 3 or 4 crews going at one time so that we can really get our goals met in the next 20 years. The Gunnison sage-grouse issue is a threatened species here and something that we're trying to protect. And we have a really unique relationship here in the Gunnison Basin between our agricultural community and our environmental community. And we've gone through great lengths to both preserve this species and at the same time maintain our agricultural activities in the basin. And we have a lot of private landowners who participate in programs that helped to preserve and to manage Gunnison sage-grouse habitat and protect those leks and stuff where habitat brooding and rearing occurs. And just to note that, you know, these wet meadows areas are really important for the Gunnison sage-grouse chicks because they can take advantage of the bugs and stuff that grow in those wet meadows grasses that are really important for them to be able to thrive. But just to note that climate change is also affecting the Gunnison sage-grouse species. When you have dramatic swings with huge snowfalls that happened in 2019, and then you drop the very next year to a drought condition, and then you swing back the other way, you affect not only adult survival of Gunnison sage-grouse, but you also, if you're impacting the adults, you're also impacting the number of eggs and chicks that are produced in the basin. So it's this dramatic swings even with the species that we're dealing with as well. Next slide. Again, I think it's all about balance, which they mentioned earlier. You know, while we love our land, our water, and our parks, we have to be really careful not to love them to death. We have to be careful about, how we balance our resources and the use of our resources, and that we stay upon managing our forest health and our watershed health, and also create wonderful experiences for our Colorado community and the visitors that come here to enjoy this beautiful environment that we have. That's all I have with regard to my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions later, and I really appreciate you all putting this on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm up next. Wade Shelton, I'm a senior project manager with the Colorado and Southwest Office of the Trust for Public Land. I'm also the Jeffs Conservation Fellow, but that's a very long title. None of you want to hear all of that today. I'm here to talk to you today about Fisher's Peak State Park and the opportunity the Trust for Public Land and our partners in the Nature Conservancy, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, GOCO, the City of Trinidad, and Los Animas County, among many others, are working together to help Trinidad conserve its past and grow its future by creating Fisher's Peak State Park. So what I'd like, if I get the next slide, please. What I'd like to start first is just give you all a little background on the Trust for Public Land. For those of you that are not familiar with us, we are a national conservation group. We work in all 50 states, for the past 50 years with a different kind of mission compared to most land trusts or the Nature Conservancy or the Conservation Fund, in that we are focused on preserving land for people. We certainly protect large landscapes, as you can see with Fisher's Peak, and rare species, rare habitat, and remote sensitive areas. But it always falls under the umbrella of preserving and enhancing the connections people have to land, so that everyone in the United States, whether they live in New York City, whether they live in Trinidad, Colorado, or in the suburbs, have a place close to home that they can get outside, whether that's a park, a trail, or a national park. It's pretty, as we've all learned over the past year, being able to get outside close to home, pretty important, for your day-to-day life. And we do this differently than other groups as well, in that we don't own land long-term. We don't hold conservation easements long-term. What we do is facilitate the conservation planning and creation and fundraising and creation of public funding sources to make all this work possible from Main Street to mountaintops. So whether you're in downtown Denver or you're a remote part of Colorado, we're doing the work that helps make sure everybody's got places to go outside. And we do that in 3 ways. The first is land protection, which is what you think it is. Basically buying land or buying conservation easements, getting that to the right nonprofit or government partner for long-term stewardship and maintenance. Number 2, it's doing the park design and planning work, the community engagement work, to make sure that we've got our finger on the pulse of what that community needs in terms of access to the outdoors, in terms of preserving the resources they do have, or enhancing them if they don't have access to much. And really making sure that we are taking up a bottom-up approach to our work, so that we're not coming in as a national group trying to tell a rural community, this is what you need. Instead, we're listening to them and implementing their vision so we can actually help address their challenges. And then the third piece is through conservation finance, which is a unique area the Trust for Public Land's been working on for quite some time, where we basically work with local municipal partners all the way up to the state level to identify what kind of opportunities they might have to create dedicated funding sources for conservation, whether that's agricultural conservation, water conservation, focusing on parks, trails, and open space, basically working with those local partners to make sure there's a match for federal funding. So when President Biden's 30 by 30 plan, trying to conserve 30% of our country's land and water by 2030, making sure there's actually local funding to match all that federal funding. If I get the next slide, Pete, please. So, Trust for Public Land, we've been working in Colorado for over 25 years. In the Southwest, same amount of time, preserving over 700,000 acres of land. And 6 years ago, I was reading the New York Times on Sunday, like many of us do, and I came across an article that really could have been titled "Ranches Virtually None of Us Can Afford." The title they used was far more clever, but it really focused on these large landscape ranches around the West that outside of Ted Turner or some wealthy individuals, none of us could write checks for or ever consider owning. And just kind of, it was kind of a fun puff piece about, hey, look at all the amazing properties out there that none of us can ever visit. And Fisher's Peak was one of the centerpiece of this the article. It was the time called the Crazy French Ranch after the French couple that had bought it in the 1980s and had been preventing it from being developed by keeping it as their private hunting ground. A pretty unique property. You don't see anymore 62 square miles that you could buy in one transaction that could really move the needle for a city like Trinidad. So it was really a neat, kind of pie in the sky type project of saying, well, it'd be really amazing if we could buy 20,000 acres and Fisher's Peak and turn that into a state park or a state wildlife area or something like that. So I managed to connect with the owner and her broker. Let's just say the fast talking guy from Baltimore originally and the French expat who chain smoked French cigarettes and drank a bottle of Bordeaux by herself in an hour. It took us a while to build a rapport, but you could tell that she was a conservationist. She didn't want to see the property developed, but she was pretty unrealistic about how much it was going to cost. And if I get the next slide, please. So when I was able to hike up to the top of Fisher's Peak 6.5 years ago and meet the owner and really get a feel for the property, what you could see right away was a tremendous opportunity for the city of Trinidad, southeastern Colorado, and rural Colorado in general to really demonstrate how you could use conservation as an economic driver. Fisher's Peak provides a scenic backdrop for the city of Trinidad at one of our main gateways, 15 miles from the Colorado-New Mexico border. And basically, as you drive down I-25 past Trinidad to New Mexico, the entire property is on your left as you move south. And as a lot of folks referenced earlier, it's striking a balance for access to the outdoors is pretty critical these days. Our public spaces are getting loved to death throughout Colorado as more and more people move out here and there's more demand on water. And if we don't get more places for people to go, we're going to lose the very things that are making people want to come here to visit and live. So we saw an opportunity to strike a balance between public recreation and nature preservation right away. Partnering with the Nature Conservancy, pursue the project, recognizing this is a big opportunity, but something that would more likely to be successful if we work together with our sister organization that's focused on nature preservation and us focused on public access. It's pretty rare that you have public open space where you could plan it from the beginning at striking a balance between recreation and preservation. Usually it's one or the other, and then you find yourself down the road trying to do some triage to fix the property you're being loved to death or realize, hey, we've got this amazing spot no one can go to. We also saw an opportunity for economic development and to help Trinidad to build a recreation-based economy. Trinidad, as I'm sure you all know, is not known for public recreation or tourism right now. It's a former coal mining town that at best has been a stopover for years. Before marijuana was legal, it was a stopover for people from New Mexico or Texas wanting to go to our ski resorts. And now many of them are driving to the border to buy marijuana. But that is not a sustainable economy for a rural or an urban community. And what we saw with Fisher's Peak was the potential to create an over 55.5 square mile of publicly accessible land, because Fisher's Peak is directly adjacent to state wildlife areas that until we bought it, you couldn't access from Colorado. So with one purchase, you could create this core protected area that could be a huge destination for mountain bikers, hunters, climbers, hikers, bird watchers, to folks of all stripes, but you needed the opportunity to get there. And then there's also an opportunity to really use the project to address equity and public health. Typically, those are issues that come up more in urban settings around conservation, of making sure that people live in urban communities can have places to get outside close to home, and making sure that they have access to physical activity, and the outdoors, so you get the physical and mental health benefits of being able to get outside. But as we all know, the reality is that rural communities have similar barriers and challenges to getting outside and having that quality of life. Just because you can see Mount Princeton out your window does not mean you can get there easily or that you can recreate close to home. So we saw an opportunity to really help address demonstrate how you could address these challenges in a rural community and create a replicable model that maybe other rural communities could use to try and address similar challenges. And that combined, all of this could be done through a master planning process that would meet the local community's needs and establish a replicable model that other communities throughout Colorado or the entire country could look to as how could we learn from Fisher's Peak to move beyond resource extraction or move into more recreation-based economy. So tremendous opportunity, but one of the challenges we had was that politically at the time it was not feasible for the state of Colorado to own the property, to buy land in fee. That because of just the way the political winds have been blowing the past several years, wasn't something that we could consider out of the gate. So for years, me and my counterpart from the Nature Conservancy, Matt Moorhead, and I wanted to chase this project, but we couldn't see a way to get it permanently preserved and into public ownership. And if I could get the next slide, please. And what really changed was the city of Trinidad. That's how we actually got to the point where 2 years ago, the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy bought the property for over $25 million. And how a year ago, we were able to sell it to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to become a new state park, saving them millions of dollars on the purchase. And what changed was the city of Trinidad recognizing that they have a huge asset with Fisher's Peak being their scenic backdrop and potentially being a destination for them. And it was the community's vision that, yes, this could be something that could put them on the map and really help them diversify their economy. That's what opened the door for the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy to start pursuing the project, because it was Trinidad's persistence and community passion, where 3.5 years ago, they reached out to us and said, would you be willing to buy a portion of help us buy a portion of the property we think we could own, maybe not the whole property, but maybe the peak and just to get something. And that gave the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy the ability to say, well, how about we raise all the money and we buy the whole thing and the city of Trinidad owns it, and then you have a management partnership with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So it could be a state wildlife area, but it's you actually own it. And this is the way a lot of public recreation is done these days via conservation easements, where you might conserve a ranch and then secure some public access that Colorado Parks and Wildlife manages, on behalf of the land trust, so to speak. But in this instance, it would be far bigger than that. It would essentially be a perpetual lease of the property from the city of Trinidad. And that changed everything. By having an end game to get it into public ownership, we were able to move forward on the project, get it purchased 2 years ago. And what changed is once we had bought it and we were starting to move towards raising the rest of the funds we needed to pay off $20 million in financing, Governor Polis caught wind of what we were doing. And he saw the same opportunity that we did, that if I can bridge your fundraising gap, I can get this into public ownership now. I can make it a state park, very quickly. And we can, really demonstrate how conservation can help drive Colorado's economy. So in 2019, in September, Governor Polis announced that he was going to work with the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy and CPW and GOCO to bridge our fundraising gap and get the property into public ownership far faster than any of us ever projected. We thought it would take 2-3 years. And at the height of the pandemic a year ago on April 2nd, we got it into public ownership and it was made into Colorado's 42nd state park. I'll get the next slide, please. So we've got Colorado's 42nd state park. So what's next? Obviously that's just the beginning. There's a lot more work, to be done. First, the master planning process is already underway. We're doing a deeper dive on community engagement to really make sure we address diversity, equity, and inclusion around this project, so that this is a state park that benefits everybody and really takes a look at the history of the entire property going back to Native American tribes as well. So we really get this right from the very beginning. We're also doing economic studies as part of the master planning process to guide the process. Your initial research has indicated that the project has the potential to generate millions of dollars in recreational and tourism benefits annually. And depending on the type of trail systems we develop and the ability of the local economy to leverage the opportunity and absorb statewide demand for outdoor access and spending, we really could see this project just really transform Trinidad and Los Animas County in a really good way, in a way to revitalize their economy without gentrification, so everybody's benefiting from it at the same time. But that's going to take time. So in the meantime, we have a soft opening plan for the summer of 2021, where approximately 10 miles of trails will be open with parking, bathrooms, so people can start using the property right away. A limited public hunting is also being allowed on the property as well, with specific permits being issued by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy are also working with the City of Trinidad and Los Animas County on a recreation plan that's being funded by the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. So we can make sure that our local municipal partners have the right playbook for the kinds of infrastructure, community investment, and so on that they need to make in order to maximize the economic benefits of having a new state park at their doorstep. We're also exploring the potential for a longer-term economic study with Colorado State University, where with the idea of looking at the long-term economic impacts of the project as well, with the goal of creating a replicable model that other communities can mimic. There's also the potential for doing public health research, looking at how having a state park at your doorstep, having this economic catalytic effect can help address some of the health disparities and health challenges that we see in rural communities like Trinidad and Los Animas County. And then at the end, the long-term goal is making sure that this is the kind of project that the rest of the country can look to of how can Appalachia, which needs to transition away from coal mining, could they look to Fisher's Peak as a way to help address a lot of these challenges? So to conclude, if I get the last slide, please. The overall goal is to make the Crazy French Ranch and Fisher's Peak, beautiful, well-managed public asset that benefits the local community and really helps Trinidad grow in a sustainable manner. And one of the things that really, I think, this project demonstrates, so this is a question that I believe Robin Mendelson posed earlier in the session, was how can we get rural, more conservative communities where folks might not be as open to conservation or regulation, how can we get them to see the benefits of this? And I'd say the key is to listen to them and really to try and speak to that, engage that community in a way that appeals to them and not necessarily, in our wheelhouse or our choir, so to speak. And with Fisher's Peak, what I found is that by really focusing on economics and preserving their way of life, making sure that there's a balance, that we don't see Trinidad become a Breckenridge or something like that, that it made them much more receptive, to the benefits that they could receive from it. And, throughout my career, what I've regularly seen with more conservative communities who might, typically not see the appeal of conservation, it's really, listening to them and trying to help them see some of the direct benefits they'll get from this. It might be things like the NRCS conservation programs that demonstrate to ranchers, hey, government programs are keeping you in ranching. But it's really trying to look at conservation through their eyes and how it can preserve the very things they care about. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that's a lot to process, but it's been a very intense 3 years getting to this point.
Thanks so much, Wade. And you starting to already integrate one of the questions into your answer was a perfect segue into what we're going to do now, which is open this up for a conversation. First, I don't know about all of you, but give a virtual round of applause. I feel like we just got taken on a virtual tour of our state by our panelists with all these great projects that are in every corner and pocket of the state. So I know I learned a lot about things that are going on that are really quite inspirational given how the communities have owned them. So Wade, you did go ahead and answer one of the questions, and I'll let the other panelists perhaps talk about that as well. And if we can pull up all the panelists actually. So I'm going to give an option to the audience. I'm first going to turn it over to either Maggie or Jim to talk about the film that they kind of put a quick resource link to in the box, a film that Colorado Humanities did put together on water in Colorado, because I think you all heard from just the synopsis of what Sonja could even talk about, that it's a complex, deep historical issue. And so for those who are most curious about it, you could probably spend hours on that. So I'll let you guys give a little bit of highlight reel on that film that you already mentioned, and then I'm going to give people a choice that have been asking questions, whether you want me to go ahead and ask the panel those questions, or if you want to open up your mic and you want to ask yourself. But first, I'll turn it over to Maggie or Jim to give us a little bit more context on that film that was mentioned.
I'm going to ask Jim to give a brief description. I think he ends up promoting this film a lot more than we do lately, but it is still really, really valuable resource and very beautiful.
Well, thanks, Maggie. I appreciate that. And I'm not, my picture's not on the screen because my wife and I have been eating dinner during this presentation, so excuse me for that. The Great Divide is the name of the film. It's a 96-minute film that looks at the entire issues around water in Colorado and gives a historic perspective as well as present day challenges around all the issues of water in Colorado. And it's available online through our website at havipro.com. HAV is a victory, EYPRO.com. You can watch it there on a Vimeo download. And it also showed around the state. We showed it in about 20 communities throughout Colorado, and so it's gotten a lot of play, and I think people have found it very, very engaging, and it was certainly an eye-opening thing for me to produce and to work on. Water in Colorado is probably the most critical issue that we're dealing with today in Colorado, and there's nothing that we need more and that could have a bigger impact on the quality of life in Colorado than our watersheds.
Well, and thank you very much. That, and it reminded me, just so all of you aren't sitting there trying to scribble down websites or copy and paste out of the chat box. We are recording this. We're recording the whole conversation, and both a link to where you can watch this or send it to someone you think in your circle who would benefit from it, or where you want to, we'll also compile all of the links of the resources shared tonight in a Word document that we'll share with you as well, or post at the Colorado Humanities and CSU Ready sites. So you don't have to sit there and scramble and collect all those. We'll get those to you. We're gonna start with water just because you set that up. And I think even though only Sonja was supposed to be the water person, everybody knows every single topic that got talked about tonight has an interdependency with water. So first from Colorado Humanities, I'll ask that question, but then I might open up the mic to some of the other participants. How much of the water in Colorado's watershed actually belongs to the state? And I know this varies by time. And is it that we're selling a lot of water to other states, or is it institutional and legal agreements that we have that means we have to share so substantially? Sonja, is that something you have on the top of your head?
Yeah, so it's an institutional agreement under the Colorado River Compact. So we don't sell water to other states, but we share the waters within the Colorado River Basin. And the Colorado River Compact of 1922 was put in place to share those resources. And again, we thought we had made way more water available back then than we actually did. They developed the Colorado River Compact in a period or a time when we were just getting a lot of precipitation and snow, and it was just an overestimation. So it is a legal agreement.
So I just out of curiosity, of you panelists, how many of you participated in some way, shape, or form in the formulation of the state water plan that was done in the last 5 years or so? Yeah, I didn't know if you had, Heather, but I haven't got to go to one listening session. But so anyone who wants to can take this question. But how critical is that state water plan in offering up some potential solutions to the crisis we do see coming, given what Sonja just said about the overpromising to other states and the continuing increased pressure on demand in the state? Any one of you or all of you who want to talk about that, or if there's others on the call who want to raise your hand, we can certainly call on you as well.
And I'm not shy, you know, you work in real estate, you have to be an extrovert. You know, It's conservation real estate, but it is still real estate. I mean, I've done a lot of water conservation in the upper Arkansas Valley in particular, and in the Swatch Creek corridor that's part of the San Luis Valley. And what I see is one of the bigger challenges for us and why the water plan is critical is how much water is being commodified in Colorado. And that's been true of the Arkansas for a long time, because all the Arkansas water, either, if you're in Little Arkansas River, you flow into the Salida Water Treatment Plant. And if you're in the main stem, you're going to the Pueblo Reservoir. So it's pretty easy for those water rights to get shifted from ag uses into industrial, municipal uses. Until we started working in the Arkansas Valley 14 years ago, getting dry ups of ranches there was pretty common. And we've been able to shift that away by giving ranchers another option of conserving their water, via easements rather than, having to do dry ups. But that's really expensive. And what's also happening now more in the Swatch Creek corridor, where that is a closed basin, there's no way right now to get water out of the Swatch Creek corridor. So we've been able to conserve most of the private farms and ranches along the corridor with Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Land Trust over the past 20 years. But this past summer, there was a group of water speculators who was led by former Governor Bill Owens, trying to buy a ranch in Swatch that for its water storage rights. And if they got that and one other, then they have what they need to build a pipeline out of the Swatch Creek Valley and start drying up ranches. Well, fortunately, a ranching family that we are working with in Salida on a conservation easement on the Arkansas River, they bought that ranch and they're working with us on an easement on it with the Cattlemen's Land Trust. So that's what I see the biggest threat, is that much like in California a few years ago, where you had the drought and you had folks overpaying for water because they could, if we allow that to happen in Colorado, it doesn't matter how much we do to limit our water use and try and get things right based on the interstate compact, because we'll have water speculators using water for other things. If we don't conserve more of what we have and start getting smarter about water use in the Front Range, we're going to be hurting, over the next century.
So the Colorado Water Plan also, so the roundtables, there are basin roundtables throughout the state that all participated in providing information to the state that led into the development of that Colorado Water Plan. So I think there was a lot of work and a lot of information and a lot of data that finally got to the state that said, hey, here's our needs, here's what it's going to cost to take to address it, here's our concerns, here's our existing uses. What are we going to see in 20, 25 years? What do we have to plan for? How much water use are we going to have? How much growth? How are we going to deal with climate change and declining water supplies? How do we look at storage? I think it has really led, the state has been very dependent upon severance taxes to fund water infrastructure or environmental needs and things like that within our basin. We can't depend upon that severance tax because it's not a stable source of funding to help our state deal with the water needs that we have. So I think the state is working really hard to find a stable water supply, stable funding source to help support the infrastructures that we need to better operate our on-farm systems, our off-farm deliveries, support, having infrastructure that works so you can close head gates and leave more water in the stream at the appropriate times. So it really does help to set out a blueprint for what we're going to do as a state and then as local communities as well.
I just agree with Sonja on that. It's the whole planning process was invaluable. You got stakeholders in the room. They got to talk about what was important to people, and people got to see what was really going on. I think that was absolutely critical going forward. So I know the couple that we participated in, it was really enlightening. So I think that has been a great tool for the state of Colorado. Implementing those plans is another more difficult step, but you have to start with a plan. And I think that's a pretty good one.
Great. Maria has a question, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself, Maria, and ask yourself if you'd like.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering how the proliferation of the marijuana industry, especially in our area of Las Animas and Huerfano County, is impacting the water supply.
I don't deal a lot with municipal water supplies and that water quality side with marijuana use. I know you may be able to find it in your waste. I know you can find things, like drugs like antidepressants you can find in the water supply and stuff too. I don't know if they're finding marijuana as well and how that behaves within those systems.
I can speak a little bit to what we've seen with past few years proliferation of grow operations in Saguache County and how that's impacted things. Is that if you can get, what we found is that it was impacting the local water supply. Now, granted, Saguache, everyone's on wells, you don't have a municipal system, but one of the challenges you get into is there is a prioritization for surface water use, for irrigation in Colorado. So if you have a junior right and it's a drought, you're not turning on your center pivot that year. You got to shut your head gate down or you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Well, wells do not have a similar prioritization system for irrigation wells or anything like that in Colorado. So what happened, as the marijuana industry proliferated over the past 10 years, and more folks realized I can get my 40 acres in Saguache for very, very little, and I can pay people who live there $1 a gallon of water. They fill up a 750-gallon tank, that might be their rent for the month. And they can do that in a day. And they could overpay for that kind of stuff. So what you saw was that the aquifer was getting drawn down and that the state was looking at, well, how do we preserve this water? Do we need to start acquiring surface water rights to make up for the overuse of wells, which of course upset a lot of the ranchers in the area that have surface water rights. And many of them have conserved with conservation easements saying, well, you're not getting our water because, it's already protected. So what I see with the marijuana industry is that because marijuana is legal here and not in a lot of other places, it's being grown in areas where it's not suited for. There's not enough water, the soil's not good enough. And, if the rest of the country doesn't start legalizing it, and I think we'll continue to see overuse of water and some externalities as a result of everybody growing, marijuana in Colorado.
And I know Julie Kallenberger with the Colorado Water Center is here on the call. And I don't know if she wants to speak up, but has the center been asked or engaged to do any work on either the water quality or quantity implications of that fast growing industry? Julie, do you know?
Not that I'm aware of, Dawn, but I can poke around and see if I can find any resources for you to share with the group when you put together your document after this. I'll take a look and see what's going on.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Well, and it kind of is a weird tangent, and I'm happy to ask this for I think it was Marilyn who brought up, but or maybe it wasn't Marilyn. It was one of our audience brought up. Several of you kind of alluded to gentrification, and Heather, particularly since you're so focused on community-based conservation. And I don't know that you ever got so nuanced as to talk about if the community is the longtime heritage, families have been there for generations community, or the new incoming community, or some mix of both. But what have you seen in community-based conservation activities, even with the nuanced tensions between different people in community and perhaps what their historical context is, or what industry, or are they a second home person versus an agriculturalist? Have you seen any of those tensions play out, and how have you navigated that?
Dawn, thanks for.
Okay, great.
Hi, sorry, my internet connection is unstable, so I just dialed in. Apologies, everyone. But it's a really important question, and as you're implying, even by the question, it's really complicated. But Colorado has experienced since the early 1990s some of the biggest movement from urban to rural landscapes since the land rush days. There's been a huge impact on rural communities, both socially and culturally and economically. So I live just halfway between Fort Collins and Laramie in one of the last ranching communities on the Northern Front Range. And, we've seen the
the number of ranches dwindle significantly in the last 25 years under pressure from urban growth coming up the Front Range. And it's only been the proactive community kind of looking towards the future together to say, what kind of place do we want to have? How important is local food production to us? Recognizing people have got to be somewhere. So where do we put people in a smart way? How do we provide them with better urban and suburban quality of life so they don't feel like they necessarily have to all live out in rural places where we have good soils for food production? But how can we also give them experiences where they can be out of doors and enjoying these landscapes? So it's a real challenge, and often the rate of change happens so quickly, it's hard to get ahead of it and be prepared. And that's why it's important for communities to really look to the future together and really invite in as many partners and voices as they can to really think about, you know, where are we today and how did we get here? It's important to know your human and natural history, right? Where you've been to be able to figure out where you're going to go. But these are great challenges, especially in a place like Colorado where we have so many great things that draw so many people here. It's a matter of then understanding each other and coming together to think about what do we care about most, and understanding we all have differences and priorities, but you know, how do we then focus on the things we care about together and create solutions for that?
Well said, Heather. I'd like to build on that if I can, because I can give an example of what the Trust for Public Land's been doing in the Upper Arkansas Valley, specifically Chaffee County, for the past 14 years, where it took us some time, but you know, through our land protection work and our conservation finance work, we've helped our local partners in Chaffee County come up with a way to try and push back against this rural gentrification. Those of you not familiar with the Valley, it was heating up in a big way before the Great Recession hit, you know, back in 2008. And honestly, it probably, you know, let a little bit of a safety valve go off and give that area a break from, you know, what was shaping up to be a lot of second home development and water rights acquisition before the Great Recession hit. And what's happened is basically it took us time to get the ranching community behind it and get the local political leaders behind it. But we spent a long time engaging them around the possibility of creating a dedicated local funding source for conservation in Chaffee County, doing a lot of the stuff Heather just talked about, of, you know, engaging with the traditional ranching community and getting a sense of what do they need to stay sustainable, not just by buying conservation easements, but looking at, you know, once you've, you know, conservation easement's a great tool to conserve a ranch, conserve its water, and keep it in private hands. But from an economic standpoint, it's a one-time investment, you know, in that you know, agricultural operation. And we wanted to get a sense of what do they need to be successful long-term. We also wanted to engage all the folks who had moved to the Valley to help educate them and let them understand, look, if you lose all the ranches and all the irrigated agriculture that you have here, you're not going to have the rafting seasons that you guys, you know, are counting on. You're not going to have, you know, the great fly fishing that the Arkansas Valley is known for. And while 80% of your land's in public ownership and 20% is in private, you're going to lose the very critical pieces that make that valley a place where, when I first arrived there 14 years ago, I had to, you know, pick my proverbial jaw off the floor of the car of just how amazed it was to the kid from Baltimore. So, you know, it was really engaging with them and helping them understand, okay, you're here. Nobody's going to make you feel bad about that. But if we don't preserve the things that attracted you here, you're going to wake up and say, geez, what happened to the Valley? So what Chaffee County did was they created dedicated funding for conservation as, you know, match for a GOCO, a CPW, RCS, you know, a lot of the traditional funding sources for land protection work. But it's enabled us to do things in a much larger scale than we have over the past 10 years. A good example was last year, we were able, working with the Central Colorado Conservancy and Colorado Cattlemen's Land Trust, we got 4 projects funded around Browns Canyon National Monument, preserving, you know, over 4,000 acres and over a half mile of fishing access to the river, we're able to do that because you had a local funding source we could leverage against GOCO, CPW, and federal funding sources. But that local funding source, Chafee Common Ground, it also literally pays farmers and ranchers subsidies to stay in farming and ranching. And it's, to me, that is addressing a lot of the economic externalities you get with second home development, where we all value the clean air, the water, the public recreation, the views, the great food. But if you're not paying those farmers and ranchers subsidies so that they can pay their property taxes, weather the drought and so on, economics will push them out no matter what we do from a land protection standpoint. So it's really looking at, I'd say, expanding what the federal government's been doing with trying to keep people in farming and ranching, is looking, can you support that on a local level as well?
Gunnison County implemented it was the early 2000s, the Gunnison County Land Preservation Board, and in the county itself, over I think it's close to 100,000. Oh, actually, I take that back. It's 80,000 acres have been preserved, put under conservation easement in the Gunnison Basin or Upper Gunnison Basin. But there is a lot of education that has to happen with our community when they come in. There are always conflicts between pressures from recreationists and mountain bikers and agriculture producers and illegal camping and stuff like that. So we kind of serve as that intermediary, sometimes to help with the outreach programs or to help fund watershed coalitions to, protect the blue heron while still allow people to float, but say, don't play your loud music, don't take your dog. So we do have a lot of challenges, and we in the Upper Gunnison Basin, we have a lot of older, larger ranching families. We don't have a lot of the smaller, maybe hobby farmers that you might have in the Lower Gunnison Basin yet. But for those of you who may not know, water is now a commodity that is sold on the New York Stock Exchange. There are hedge fund companies buying up irrigated agricultural lands and hedging on the bet that in some point in the future, there are going to be large municipalities, downstream of them, whether that be in Arizona or California. It's happening widely in Arizona, that are going to need that water, and they're going to sell it for the highest price. So that definitely is a threat to agricultural sustainability in our future. And so, food and fiber production. So it's just something, that's speculation. There's an anti-speculation group that's been formed at the state level that has experts providing input on just how do you prevent that? I mean, we even have areas like Aurora buying up water supplies to support their growth, so there's differences there. It's an in-state benefit versus sending our water downstream to someone else or selling it to the municipality for the highest price, but it is being sold right now on the New York Stock Exchange.
Well, that was a great set of answers, guys. Continue to be amazed, and please, again, tell me if you're a part of the audience and you want to ask any of your questions or contribute to the conversation yourself. The one last thing that was asked that's kind of more pertinent to what you covered, Mike, is a question on whether the national fire suppression policy has impacted the situation we're facing right now, or it's all just interrelated and people still trying to figure out the right way forward.
Absolutely.
Can I say something? I asked that question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Chris. And I guess I'm coming from the standpoint, I grew up in Evergreen when it was all ranching communities. I mean, Highwan was a working ranch. I can remember eating Oreo cookies in the kitchen at the Highwan homestead with my friend Wendy Goodale when her parents lived there and her grandparents. And as a just a person, not as an educated conservationist, we're constantly asked to cut the trees and the vegetation back and to do certain things. We have mountain lions that used to sit on the rock cut and watch our kids play kickball in the driveway, and we'd have to play the boombox because we're encroaching on their space. So how can how does what the policies were impact that urban interfacing now, because it's getting very urban right on the edge of the rural. Estes Park, all of those things are that way. And what can a person like me do, but that doesn't necessarily make me feel like I'm denuding my property and living outside of my trees,
Well, that's a great question. And so I'm going to go at it in two different ways, because those are actually two different questions. The first one is what you can do. We have a lot of information on home hardening on our website, but there are things you can do. But here's the tricky part about it. It's kind of like getting a vaccine. If you're the only one that gets a vaccine, it doesn't do as nearly as much as everybody gets a vaccine. So if you're the only one keeping your trees 30 feet from the house and limbing up your trees to try to reduce that danger of fire, it helps, but it helps a lot more if your neighbor does it. And then if your other neighbor does it, it helps even more. So a lot of the work we do are with homeowners associations. Like I said earlier, there's only 110 of us, so we can't go to individual homeowners and really do a lot with them other than offer that information on the website. But we can work with homeowners associations to help them do that over a much larger area. When you have a year like this summer, doing that will increase the possibility of your home surviving a wildland fire. It won't guarantee it, but it increases that probability. A summer like we had this summer with the winds howling, drought and all that makes it a lot tougher. But again, I mentioned what the folks at Arapahoe Roosevelt had done with the work they had. It can make a difference. I mean, fire is a lot about energy. And if you can do something to rob that energy, or where they run into old fire scars, it really sucks a lot of energy out of that. So I would say that, first of all, go to the website and check it out. We've got a lot of information on that. You talk to folks at the Missoula Fire Lab, they'll tell you that home hardening is a step you need to take. The bigger question is yes, the put the fire out by 10 a.m. has really, really ramped up the amount of fuels we have in our forest. For example, Front Range ponderosa pine is the most common pine. It is very much a fire adapted species, always has been. And naturally, because it has frequent fire, it tends to grow in individual stems, park-like groups, that type of thing. Well, when we suppress fire, all of a sudden those are very thick. So in the past, that park-like stand survived fire very well. It's got really thick bark and a lot of space. But when you cram all those trees together, they're no longer surviving those fires. So yeah, the fire suppression policy has had an impact. And I think we're all aware of it. We're trying to work our way around it. But with half of Coloradans living in the wildland urban interface, you just can't let fires go. So it's a tricky dance on using prescribed fire, which has risk to it, mechanical thinning, which is expensive, or just letting it burn, which I would argue is the least acceptable alternative going forward. But yeah, I think working with your neighbors and trying to, those very basic things about looking at 3 zones out from your house. And everybody loves trees. That's why I'm in forestry. And so we have a hard time convincing people that big pine tree over their house should go. But I will be honest with you, when we do convince them of that, they'll go out there and look and go, wow, well, for the first 3 months, they hate it. But that first spring, they'll go out there and look and go, oh my God, we never saw that before. We can see this vista now that wasn't available to us. So there's a yin and a yang to that as well. But I don't think any of us want to see our homes burned down. So that home hardening, moving vegetation back from the house, windows, making sure there's not little places where embers can build up in there. All those small things can make a big difference. But you can't do that when the fire's bearing down on you. You have to do it. You have to do it now.
Thank you.
Great answers. I'm going to look for a link because I know this is in the governor's plan a little bit, but do you all know of any places where the federal funds, or even how the governor is going to use the state block grant they'll get from the federal funds, are being used to support natural resource projects?
It's
An example?
We had our first discussion on this 2 days ago, but it's only being discussed. They're trying to figure out how to divide it up. And I am way down the food chain from these discussions. So I'm gonna tell you from the peon looking up. but it would appear that natural resources are going to be an important recipient of some of those funds going forward. How much, where, I can't really tell you, but I can tell you that it's very much part of the discussion.
I can speak a little specifically of, like, again, much like Mike, I'm not going to overstate things. Low on the totem pole. It's I make sure my boss calls the right people, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, that because of the Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA grant we helped Los Animas County get for the recreation plan for Trinidad, there is some push at looking at would Fisher's Peak State Park be an ideal, you know, project to look to federal stimulus funding for, and making sure there's the appropriate state level match. Is the more that project, you know, gets things right on the natural resource piece and the economic development piece, the more it shows Colorado leading the nation, and the more we can recreate in other parts of the country, so on other parts of the state. So I don't know for certain that's how it's going to move, but I know that before the pandemic hit, there was a push to get 10 million allocated towards developing Fisher's Peak State Park. So I would imagine there's a similar push for all of that. So, you know, I think from where I sit, I get the impression that Governor Polis really does understand that Colorado's natural resources, it's why people move here. It's why, you know, we're starting to get our own version of Silicon Valley outside of Boulder. It's because of the quality of life. And if we don't take care of that, yeah, people leave Colorado just like they're leaving California now.
Dawn, thank you. That's expresses a lot of it very, very well. Dawn just published the link to the governor's plan, and it has, on a broad scale, a lot of the things that Wade and I were talking about.
I just recently served on a climate action or a climate work group for Western Colorado, and that was sponsored by Senator Bennett. And I can tell you he's very aware of the challenges that we have within the state of Colorado with regard to our forest health. And I think he's pushing really hard to get some things done at a national level and get some funding flowing here to address the resource concerns that we have. And then I think just post-pandemic, I think there's a lot of people, you know, we have the energy assistance program, and we're putting dollars into that to help people pay their energy bills, but people are also struggling to pay their water bills. And so I think they're trying to find a way to push some of that money towards whether that happens under the energy assistance program or what, but to help people pay their water bills. So there are federal funds that they're trying to flow, I think, into to help with some of those things within the state and around the nation, on the West specifically too.
I'll also add that Senator Bennett's been fantastic on ag conservation since he was elected. And one of the more funny anecdotes I have of meeting with him when he was working on reauthorizing the farm bill, you know, that right after he got elected, you know, and this is a good example of this is how I think another question was, how do you get in the time of COVID, how do you get folks to care about water conservation? How do you get them to care about these things if they can't take masks seriously? And again, it's speaking to them in their language and not ours, you know, of really thinking about what their concerns are rather than your own. You know, a big surprise, empathy is a big part of what you do. And so we brought a number of ranchers, TPL, Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Land Trust, worked with to meet with Senator Bennett. And one of them, she said, I'm a card-carrying member of the Tea Party, and I don't have any use for any government programs except for this one. And me and my friend for Cattlemen's were elbowing each other saying, how much did she get paid for easement? It's funny how that works. But that's what changed it for her, was that, oh, this program benefited me directly. And that got her then thinking about other farm bill programs, why it matters that you have SNAP benefits in urban areas so that people could actually buy the beef that she grew. Yeah, and Senator Bennett was funny. He responded to her comment was, well, I left my Bolshevik badge at home so we can all be friends today. So we've got really good leadership on those issues, but the key is just getting the landowners to, and the public who might not see it this way to understand why conservation is important. What that might mean, I'll give it an example from the Upper Arkansas Valley, is taking them by a ranch that's been dried up and have them see the moonscape that you'll never be able to restore or bring. And no one reacts, you know, positively to that. You know, helping, if you work with, you know, I found a lot of the ranchers I work with, once I've completed a project with them, if I'm trying to convince someone else, I have them talk to the landowner, have them talk to somebody who has similar, politics, values as them, and can help them see it through their eyes. But again, it's talking to people and helping them realize that if we don't do things smarter, they're going to lose all the things they care about as well.
Yeah, and just real quickly, the act that Senator Bennett is trying to get through is called the Outdoor Restoration Force Act. It's about, I think, about $60 billion for the issues in the interior West, which is more than all of us make in a week. And the other thing is that it's at the governor's desk right now, adding $6 million to our forest restoration wildfire mitigation fund. That's a grant fund we have, and Sonja mentioned oil and gas severance that is sporadically funded by that. But the governor thinks this is an important thing to try to get some help to folks to do the work that we were talking about earlier. So you never can tell, but anyway, it's gotten through all the stages. I think it's headed to the governor's office now, and the governor certainly was pushing that going forward in a similar amount next year. So some things are happening that give us some tools to try to address the health of the forest in Colorado and consequently the health of our watersheds.
Well, I promised we would give Robin one last chance to ask a question, but this conversation has made 2 hours go pretty fast, so we are going to start wrapping up. But Robin, I did want to give you a chance because you had several great questions throughout the night. And so go ahead and unmute yourself and I'll let you ask.
Great. Can you hear me? Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question about the use of water by the fracking industry. It uses millions of gallons, and that could be a huge source of preserving water. So maybe somebody could address how we can transition that industry away from using so much water, or just transition away from fracking to begin with. Thanks.
I guess I'd look at Julie because she probably has the answer to this, but I think that agriculture uses roughly 80% of our water. Julie, is that close?
Yeah, the estimates are anywhere from 80 to 90%, kind of ebbs and flows with the source.
So just a correction, we don't use 80%. We might divert 80% or have water rights to 80%, but we only consumptively use a portion of that. And it's probably around 2%, I think is the figure. So just when we say the agricultural uses, we need to be careful about what we're citing here.
Thank you, Sonja. Appreciate that.
Also, I would add then the estimates for water statewide used for fracking is anywhere from 0.1 to 0.4% of the total of our statewide water use. So significantly lower compared to other uses of water.
I will say though, growing up, so interestingly, Wade and I were talking, I grew up just west of Trinidad. And I can tell you that community has gone between boom and bust periods between the coal industry and then the natural gas industry and fracking. When you go up where I lived up Highway 12, you see a lot of land that's been dried. I mean, landowners sold their water rights, not really understanding, I think, completely what the impacts would be to their community. They were focused on the royalties. It's not an economically vibrant community. It's very rural. Wages are low in that area. So having the natural gas industry there, I mean, people were happy to have the jobs, good paying jobs that supported the area. But when it went away or when they stopped extracting, it was devastating. And I can tell you that across from my family ranch, when you have, those pumps occurring and that noise going at night, it's completely different. I mean, we used to have the piece of the river that you could hear at night when you were sleeping and you had your window open. Now you hear the hum of the natural gas. In addition, when my son was born, I had him sleeping upstairs at my parents' house. It was an old adobe house sitting down by the riverbed. And then they had the earthquake down there, a 5.0 earthquake. And they directly related that to the fracking industry and the intensity there. We have to monitor my family's water well very often. They're monitoring gas seeps in various areas around there due to the fracking. it's good and bad. It supports the community, but when it goes away and or declines, that the economy is left devastated. So I was really happy to see something happening with Fisher's Peak that's more sustainable for that community and that they can count on and grow around.
I appreciate the very kind words, Sonja. I mean, 'cause I'm pretty impressed by your presentation as well. And as I said during chat, my favorite class in undergrad was limnology. Who knows where I would have ended up if I had gotten a master's in that instead of just one class. But you know, it is really fortunate what we're able to do in Trinidad. And I'd say that, you know, as someone whose wife is from Appalachia originally, and I worked for the Nature Conservancy in West Virginia before I went to grad school. So I've seen the rivers that are filled with iron oxide and are orange and only grow one kind of algae that are never coming back, not for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And while that's not the same as the impact of fracking, it's the same spirit that, you know, the permanence, you know, in terms of, you know, for the human condition of what we're doing, it's really significant. And, you know, it's not the position of the Trust for Public Land. It's just my personal opinion. I'd say fracking at best, it's a stopgap to sustainable energy resources. And we're better off, you know, focused on energy sources that are not so water intensive, that don't leave the landscape, you know, hobbled, you know, for a very long time. And why I think it speaks to the more we can look for opportunities through these projects that show a more sustainable way of doing things, that really invest in the community itself, that's what's going to get people excited and more receptive to what we're all doing. And, you know, one example that Cleves reminded me of, because as I was mentioning to Marilyn, is that one of the neat things we're looking at in Trinidad with Fisher's Peak is a partnership with Trinidad State Junior College's Sustainable Trail Design and Construction Program. It's the only program of its kind in the country, and I think maybe the world. And one of the ideas we've had is that, well, if you've got these students coming to Trinidad and want to learn how to do sustainable trail design, well, let's have them build some trails in Fisher's Peak State Park. We could have our own little mini civilian conservation corps that could really be a unique demonstration project on how to do this. And I think of the skills they're going to get doing that. We've also batted around some ideas of, hey, if downtown Trinidad needs to be revitalized, we need to fix up a lot of buildings, or some of these crews, it's this stuff they could work on as well. But it's things like that where you can create jobs that encourage people to stay in a community, and it's not a boom or bust cycle that really will let rural communities be vibrant, thriving communities that we all want, because that's what they want too. I think that the challenge is that for too long, a lot of folks in rural areas have been told subdivision, selling for development, bringing developers in, that's the way to do it. When the reality is you'll pay more in the infrastructure extensions and you'll get in property taxes from anything like that. So it's making sure the conversations and the planning around all this are really honest and accurate about what the pluses and minuses of resource extraction versus, you know, recreation-based economy as an example, so that these communities can make the right decisions for themselves.
And we really need to help. And I think Senator Bennett, and one of the projects that came out of our task force too, was helping these communities transition to more sustainable types of economies. Because we know, I mean, this is a big push of the Biden administration, and you can't just say you're not going to have coal, you know, you're not going to have coal-fired plants, or you're just going to stop something. You need to help these communities transition out of that. If that's, and really we do. I mean, we can't afford to have the fires, you know, throwing carbon out into our atmosphere the way they did this last year, or our forests not serving as a forest sink because they're so dry and trees are dying or being killed by beetle. Something's got to change, and it needs to change quickly, because we're seeing firsthand what the impacts of that are on our local communities and our watersheds and our overall environmental health.
I so hate to do this because this has been a great discussion, but we're butting right up against 8 o'clock, and we promised people we would wrap by then. I did want to do two things quick. I just noticed that we have one of our Colorado senators who's been not just here, but contributing lots to the discussion. Thank you for coming, Senator Simpson. Thank you to all of you. And a reminder, we will be posting, and you'll be getting a link to this recording in addition to a compilation of those links, many of which have been shared tonight, actually. And so know that we'll be back in touch with you, and we appreciate your very active and engaged participation tonight. But with that, we just want to say thank you from CSU for our part in this. And as we close out the night, let's turn it back to our host at Colorado Humanities for a few parting comments. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Dawn and panelists, for your amazing knowledge and insights and perspectives this evening. Thank you to all of the audience members who posed questions. We weren't able to get to all of the questions, but you can find resources for further study on our and Ready's website, as Dawn said. This program's recording will be posted to our Facebook and YouTube channels. Be sure to tell your friends and family, they can view it there. Please submit suggestions to us for topics for future programs. Sign up for our news at coloradohumanities.org and learn more about this series and other programs there as well. Thank you for joining us and have a good evening.